Welcome to Tell Me More. I'm Father Ralph Strohm, a priest associate for pastoral care, but I was also the preacher this past weekend, September 2nd and 3rd. And as you may be aware, Tell Me More gives the preacher an opportunity to say a little more about the sermon sometime during the week following the weekend of the sermon. So last Sunday I preached on a famous story from the Old Testament, from the book of Exodus, commonly known as the burning bush story. And I'm just going to go over that briefly with you, and I'm sure many of you know the story. In a nutshell, Moses is shepherding his father-in-law's sheep. His father-in-law is Jethro, near a mountain, and he sees a bush that's burning, but it's not being consumed. So out of curiosity, he goes over and sees it, and as a result of that, God speaks to him out of the bush and commands Moses to go back to Egypt. He's now on the Sinai Peninsula in a land called Midian. He's been there for 40 years because he had to leave Egypt because he had murdered somebody, and the Pharaoh was after him. To go back to Egypt to rescue his people. So Moses initially resists this, and as a result, the reading also includes a kind of a back and forth between God and Moses, and also God shares his name, I am who I am. And so this story begins what would be better called the call of Moses. And we kind of know the story. You remember the call of Pharaoh to kill all the firstborn in Egypt, and Moses was put in a little boat along the Nile, and he's rescued and so forth. And he spends 40 years in Egypt growing up. And then, as I said, he had to flee Pharaoh because of the murder. And so he's been 40 years in the wilderness in Midian. So he's, in effect, 80 years old. If you follow what the Bible says, he lived 120 years. He's 80 years old now. And as a result of this story, begins the call of Moses. He goes back to Egypt with his brother Aaron. We're told that Moses probably had some kind of speech impediment. He couldn't talk very well. So Aaron did the talking for him. And they go around and around with the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh will not let the people go. And then there's a series of plagues that are brought on the people, and finally they flee, and you know the Red Sea story, the parting of the waters and so on. So Moses then spends 40 years in the desert with these kind of rebellious, stubborn, stiff-necked people, trying to form them into a people, actually what we call the Israelites. Right now they're just a bunch of Hebrews. And they finally come to the land of Canaan, but Moses dies before they cross over the Jordan into Canaan. So he's been God's servant, God's witness all these years, and yet he doesn't get to go into the promised land at the end. The question I'd kind of like to talk about briefly and also end the talk is, was Moses a great man, or was he a superman? I can't, or a great figure or a super figure if you don't want to use gender. I can't help not thinking about the movie The Ten Commandments with Charleston Heston. Very virile, very virile, tall, just enough gray to make him look very wise and so on. So was he that kind of almost a superman, or was he just a great man? So I'm going to read a little brief description about this answer to this question, and it's written by a distinguished professor, Alan Millard. And he writes, Moses is portrayed as a great man, but not a superman. In the Bible's, but not a superman in the Bible's customary honest way. Our text describes him as very humble, and his attempts to avoid God's commission and his need to have his brother Aaron as his spokesman suggest a shy nature. And again, he may have had some kind of speech impediment as well. When he flees Egypt and goes to the Sinai Peninsula in Midian, he marries one of 7 daughters of Jethro, Zipporah, and they have at least one child, and it's a male, and he's not circumcised, which may indicate uncertainty about his identity. He's really believe he's a Hebrew, a matter that had to be put right before he could become Israel's leader. So on the wilderness journey, the people's frequent complaints about they don't have enough to eat, they don't have enough to drink, they're cold, and so forth, have him back again and again to God, who promised to be with him. Yet when God offered to make him the founder of a new nation after Israel's apostasy with the golden calf, Moses volunteered to bear God's punishment himself in place of Israel. His involvement in God's acts of power all the way from Egypt to Canaan showed God's approval of him and helped mold the people to respect and accept him. So our burning bush story, or the better, I think, the call of Moses, begins this journey of Moses. And as you and I know, we also have a call from Jesus to follow our mission, our part in the wilderness journey to the promised land. Thank you for watching.